Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Hillary Zwallen.
And I'm Amy Schreiber. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
Welcome to today's episode. Today we're talking about creating sacred space, how you can turn your physical space, your home, your office, bedroom, or anywhere you are into sacred space so you can approach your life for a cleansed, as a cleansed and centered experience. We're also going to talk a little bit about energetic protection, because I think a lot of times people use the same tools to designate sacred space as they do to feel protected energetically. Yes. So before we start, I wanted to do a little reflection and housekeeping on where we are right now. We're 8 episodes in, Amy. Yay.
Yes.
Here we are.
Coming along.
Yes, we've had moments that we are truly proud of. We've also had moments where we generalized and said a lot of ums, and upon re-listening, sometimes felt like we didn't make total sense in every aspect. So I just wanted to put that out there as an exercise in pulling back the curtain of this process, how this process is working throughout all aspects of our lives. How do you feel like it's been, Amy, for you over the last 8 weeks?
Definitely ever evolving. And I appreciate the feedback, positive and negative, that we've received, because it is, we're not used to having live conversations. And we know what we're talking about when we talk to each other, but there's been a lot of times where we say things that people might not have any idea what we're talking about. So yeah, just try to be more clear and
ever evolving.
Kind of the goal yes. Moving forward.
Yeah, the struggle to have a conversation, present learning, be an expert, not be an expert, be a fellow traveler, and also be very aware of the discomfort that accompanies putting ourselves, quote unquote, out there in this capacity. I just want to bring that up and put it out there. So back in episode 6, and just to shed a light on one specific thing, back in episode 6, we talk about the myth of perfection and how men didn't struggle with self-love as much as women, which I realize is a huge generalization. And I think what would have been more accurate is to address that self-love and perfectionism manifest differently between male and female genders, and maybe explore that. So maybe in the future we'll revisit that, but I just wanted to put that out there. Since I'm a woman, I'm obviously more keen to the messages that are sent to women, but so we're working on that, and we are definitely not above admitting where we need improvement. And since we are the Intentionists, and sometimes the word intention can really land in the valley of overused cliches. But when you see 1,000 Instagram memes of wisdom, and right. Sometimes it's just cliche right? But I believe when it's used properly and earnestly, it can actually be such a powerful tool in your life. So we wanted to start each episode with our intention, what our intention is for us, and what we hope you'll take away as our listener. Yeah. Yes. We loved last week's episode with Casey Hall. We have a roster of really interesting interviews coming up. That's one thing that Amy and I have been discussing a lot, is bringing more people onto the show. And we've got a lot of people in the queue lined up that we're really excited to share conversations with them. And we hope that it will broaden your perspective and aid you on your spiritual path. So our intention today is to have a greater understanding of the need for sacred space and how you can use it on the daily. It's been a topic that I've been pondering a lot. What would the world be like if we were to approach our mortal experience with the intention of walking in sacred space? And sometimes how I feel like I need to invoke it literally multiple times a day just to feel like I can survive. There are moments like that. More on that a little later. We also talk about the ways you can invoke it, tools that can be used, where some of these modern spirituality-based, and I put those in quotes, modern spirituality-based practices are rooted. And we talk about cultural appropriation and whether or not the exposure to all of that on social media is good or bad.
Yes, quite a lot of ground, interesting and fun ground, though. So my favorite definition of sacred space it comes from Joseph Campbell, who said, "Your sacred space is where you can find yourself over and over again." So it's not, it can be as broad or as narrow as you kind of want it. But the point is that it's what you're defining. It's where you are finding yourself through whatever little ritual, whatever little object, whatever reminder you need to remind yourself of your intention for your space in your life. That's what it is.
Well, and there is importance. I think part of the idea of creating sacred spaces, there is the intent there of saying like, this is my sacred space, but I think there's also something about ritualizing it. And so I want to talk a little bit about the history, a brief history. Ritual and ceremony, obviously, has been used for thousands of years in hundreds of different faith traditions, from the Zulus to the Maoris, from the Chinese to the Balinese, Native North American, South American traditions with Palo Santo wood, sage, or incense from Eastern traditions. Amy, when did you first hear the word smudging?
I think, I don't remember when I first heard the word, but the first introduction to the concept of sacred space that I read about was in that one book that you gave me. It was like the Aura book, I think.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It was talking about, it was a visualization. It was like an internal mental construct of sacred space in your mind that you could go to. But I mean, we're talking today more about like the physical sacred space and setting up our environments for that. But how about you?
Well, I remember hearing, I went to Ojai. This was like 4 years ago. And of course, it all starts in Ojai, right? If you've ever been to Ojai, it's like this super sacred valley, and a lot of new age hippies and spiritual people like to pilgrim out there and stay at nice spas and feel the vibes. It's there's a lot of Native American. There's a certain tribe, which I don't know, but that inhabited the area, and that was a sacred valley for their tribe. So anyway, I heard smudging because I thought it was such a funny word when I went in for a session with a quote unquote Native American intuitive who happened to be like a 55-year-old white lady who had been trained in, I'm assuming, Native American shamanism. And I was a little skeptical of the experience at first because I had never really it was my first experience with any of that. And I remember going in, and it ended up being just the most sacred experience. I went in and she said, "I'm going to smudge you." And I was like, what is smudge? What does that mean? But it's a common name given to sacred smoke bowl blessings. And it's a powerful cleansing technique. And it's found among several of the Native North American traditions. And it's done by it calls on the spirits of the sacred plants to drive away negative energies and restore balance. So it's the art of cleansing yourself and your environment using ritual and ceremony. But the way she did it was she put sage in a bowl, and she had a little smudge stick, which was like a bundle of white sage herbs wrapped up, and she lit that on fire, and then it creates this it's a really interesting smoke because it feels like a really clean smoke. It feels like a smoke that wouldn't set off your smoke alarm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But it's also very smoky. So she lit it, and then she put it down the midsection of my body, and she used this wing. I don't know what bird it was from, but it was basically, some people just use a feather, but she had an actual
the full bird wing.
Yeah, she had an actual owl's wing or something. And it was really, I remember feeling like, I sat there and she did it, and I think she was saying a blessing that I couldn't really hear or understand, but I remember feeling really good afterwards. And it was about 5 minutes, and she just kind of moved. I could feel her kind of moving the energy around my body. And it was this really beautiful experience. And it made me think, oh my gosh, there's something to this. And that was like years ago. But anyway, so cleansing smoke. Do you want to talk about cleansing smoke?
Yeah. So the idea in many cultures with the smoke is that you're purifying the space through the smoke, symbolically and sometimes literally. And so the smoke is ascending to the heavens, and that is symbolic of prayers ascending up to the heavens in some cultures. And so I think the idea also in a lot a lot of religions and cultures who use this is that it helps incorporate all the senses to get ready for a ritual or anything else that you're about to do. Because you can see the smoke, you can smell the smoke. It's like you're using fire, it's warm. So the idea of getting like all the senses involved is talked about a lot in these cultures, in order to kind of deepen the experience, make it more all encompassing.
Right.
Yeah. So in just how it's used in a couple different cultures. Christianity, it's used in some Christian churches, and I think it's symbolic of the prayers rising to heaven. And then even in the story of the infant Jesus, the wise men brought him frankincense and myrrh, which was a part of the culture that was in the Jewish culture. They used incense.
Well, and something to note too is there's all these designated kind of sacred herbs, resins, woods, whatever materials that they're derived from, but they're regional, right? And so, of course, if frankincense and myrrh are plentiful in the Middle East, that's what they're using. And and you can still, my mom brought me back some resin when she went to, I don't know where she was, somewhere Jordan or something. And so I have this bag of frankincense and myrrh, and it looks like a waxy kind of substance, and you just you burn it, and it releases all of the fragrance. And so it kind of depends on, what there tends to be thought, I think, in certain new agey, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of new agey ingestion of this ancient stuff, where there's like a hierarchy in what type of herb that you use, that this one's better for this or this one's better for that. But it's the only reason we have that is because we have global trade, right? We're living in a world where there's global trade.
Yeah, the different areas of the world are going to have their own plants. Like where I live, in the area of Mexico that I live, the indigenous tribe here, they're the Huichols, and they use copal incense in a corn husk. It's like a little tamale, and it's made from tree resin. And I think similar types were used by the Aztecs and the Mayans.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's all stuff that they're finding in their environment around them.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as, I think the symbology also has to do with the 4 elements or the 4 directions. I know in a lot of pagan and other earth-based traditions, you have this element of earth that, the tree that the resin's from is grown from the earth with water, and you light it with fire, and then the smoke is the element of air. And there's actually an interesting point made in the book, The Spiral Dance, and it was about creating sacred space, and it was about creating an actual circle before doing a group ritual. But it was saying that the point is not so much to keep like it is to purify the space, but more than just keeping these negative, unwanted energies out, it is to contain the positive energy inside of your space, so it can then be amplified through your intention, through your ritual. Just like the example she gave was that you need to put water in a little pot in order to bring it to a boil. It's just like any act of containing the energy in a space is going to, like, through whatever means you have and want to use, to amplify that energy.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense when you say boiling the water, right? I think of when I was first experimenting with creating and designating my own sacred space, because I mean, having been raised Mormon / Christian-y, it was, you say a prayer, you open, you create sacred space by saying a prayer, you bless your food, you bless the meeting that you're in. And I think that's useful. That's one way to do it.
Right. It's the invocation. You're invoking the spirit or God into your space.
Exactly.
With the words.
Right. Yeah. And that's valid and pure and great. But I had never really used ritual before for myself. First of all, because you can't you're not allowed to do it if you don't have priesthood. And it's not part of the religion. There isn't incense burning at a church. There isn't, the men have the keys, and there isn't that kind of ritual unless you're in the temple. But the idea is that I remember thinking I really wanted to create a meditative space. And do you remember my old house, how creepy our extra bedroom was? I don't know if you remember
were so
this.
nervous to do it in there. No, I didn't think it was creepy. You would tell me all the time, like, I don't even think I can go meditate in there because it's like haunted or something.
Yes. So I had heard, and I remember thinking that the room always had weird vibes, and I never liked being in there. My kids didn't like being in there, and it was always just kind of a mess. And I remember thinking I really need to create a place where I can have sacred space. And this was during the process of me leaving the church, and I was really feeling lost, and like I wanted to have spirituality, and I wanted to invite God in, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And I remember going to our local metaphysical store and getting some Palo Santo and sage. And I remember, talking to the woman there, and she was saying, you just need to say this intention out loud, which is like your own blessing as you burn this. And then, and I still use it to this day, which is, if there's any energy that's not of love and light that has entered this space, return to the creator, to your highest vibration, and be transmuted into love, which I liked. I was like, great. That's like, get rid of the negativity. Let's designate this as sacred. And I remember going around the room and at first being like really tentative and kind of like wafting the smoke and kind of whispering it and feeling really silly because it was so foreign to me, and not really feeling like it did anything. And then, but I kept working at it. It took me like 2 or 3 weeks to get to where I finally waited until my husband left for work. My kids were at their respective schools. And I was kind of like yelling it out, like shouting it, not like shouting it, but I was using a more authoritative voice. And I felt like, I was like lighting the smoke, and I was moving around the room, and I was really feeling like I was claiming the space myself.
Yeah.
And man, and then after I did that, I had all this energy to clean it. And I remember going through and like cleaning it out, like just getting rid of all of the clutter and really making the space clear. And I remember bringing in some crystals and bringing in my scriptures and whatever else that made me feel, pictures of my ancestors and loved ones, whatever made me feel like this is my space that I'm going to call my sacred space. And I remember feeling like it was the room I always wanted to be in after that. And I felt like it was vibrating at such a high level, and whatever was there before was not there anymore. And I had heard that someone had committed suicide in that room. Like, the house is a really old house, and I'm not sure if that's true or if it was just like a tale. So I don't know if that was in my mind or if, but I found out later that was the case. So anyway, wow. I felt like I had cleared it out, and I had claimed it, and I had exercised my voice and those spiritual tools, and now it was mine,
Right. And I think just like you and Casey talked about in the interview last week too, once you go inside of a space and you set your intention for it, and you continue to infuse that space with your intentional actions, it's just kind of like a positive feedback loop. It just keeps going and going. And so like, the point where you'd already like, every time you stepped into your space after that, it was there ready for you.
Yeah, I like that.
It had all your happy vibes in it.
I wonder if it's the same when you move into a new house, and I remember moving into this house about a year ago and loving the space, but feeling like it wasn't totally mine yet. And it's just like anything when you move in, it takes a little while until you feel like your energy's really there and you've really arrived and you're really claiming it. And I think oftentimes we don't really do it that intentionally. We think, well, once we just move in the furniture and get the decorations up, then we'll feel like we're settled. But I think there's even something about saying, maybe ritualizing it and claiming the space as your own, and, saying a blessing on the space, to whatever God you believe in.
Right. Yeah. I like doing that too, especially with changes, with, like a move, or someone comes to visit, someone leaves, like anytime I clean the house, it makes me want to kind of like, okay, I'm going to reset my intention. I'm going to pull out the Palo Santo or whatever I want to use, incense or whatever, and walk around and do that.
I think that's such a great point when you have visitors in your home or you have people coming in and out, and not that they're not. I mean, I feel like most of the people that I invite to my home are people whose energy I really like and are people that I trust and that I like. But the idea is that we all kind of have this vibration that we bring with us everywhere. And I think there is something to that of just kind of claiming it. I know I was traveling a lot for work, and I always felt a little creepy in hotel rooms, right? It's like there's so much different energy with all the different people that come in and stay. And so I started creating my little travel ritual, which was I would bring like a crystal spray. And if I was, depending on where I was, if I was like in a hotel that has, fire, like if I'm in an Airbnb or something, then I'll bring a little smudge stick and I might sage it really quickly. But if I'm in a hotel and there's like risk of a smoke alarm going off, I'll just use my spray or bring crystals or whatever. But I just come in and I claim the space, and then I feel like I sleep a lot better when I do that.
And the whole point really is putting stuff in your environment, adapting it to yourself. Like what is going to be most meaningful for you, not what is most popular on Instagram right now, not anything other than like what is meaningful to you, what's reminding you of your intention. Really, the importance of ritualizing the sacred space to me is just bringing mindfulness to the concept that I'm in control of like not only the physical stuff, but the thought stuff that is making up my area right now. There was an example in the book, The Power of Habit, written by Charles Duhigg, but he talks about how Febreze became super popular because it was a flop at first. And it was because they were marketing to people saying you should use it to get rid of bad smells. But as soon as they started marketing it as like, no, this is part of your cleaning ritual. And it's to signal that like, it's the reward, like, oh, I'm done. Now I get to smell the good Febreze. But the whole point being that like, in creating a habit or adding a ritual to your life, it is effective when it piggybacks on habits that already exist. And this is kind of like a funny example to be given on this because Febreze is like smudging with like toxic chemicals. But yeah, just to illustrate the principle like of using the power of your current habits to infuse like this more mindful intention setting into your life. Like it doesn't have to be this whole extra thing.
Yeah, I love that, Amy. And I think to your point, like you said, oh, it's Febreze, and maybe some people love Febreze and they spray it all over their house. But like you could do that with a spray bottle with water and a few essential drops of essential oil, and it would have the same like that would be like a pure way. I mean, a more eco-conscious way of claiming your space. I know we got a little bit, we deviated a little bit from when we were going through the different regions of the world and what their holy woods were.
Right.
I think we stopped where we were at South American, but I think we can dovetail back into that. So South American, what they use often in Peru is the Palo Santo, which, have we talked about that yet? I can't remember if we talked about it before we were live or after.
Probably that was before. Yeah, it smells so good. It means holy wood. And the process that they say to harvest it is the tree has to be dead in the forest for like 3 years before the resins kind of, I don't know, become magical.
I think it also helps with the smell because you can get, because it's becoming really popular with all this stuff, sometimes what I've heard, you have to watch for the counterfeit stuff where they'll just kind of spray it with a scent, and then over time the scent will go away because it was just a piece of wood. But it is a hard one. It's not hard to get. It's a little more expensive, but it lasts a very long time. I have a few sticks of Palo Santo here that I've had for like a year. You know, the thing I love the smell of Palo Santo. It's used in this Quechuan shamanism that I'm learning. It's also the Catholic Church uses Palo Santo a lot, and I'm assuming that they got it from during the Crusades and like when the conquistadors came in and found this wood and probably brought it into ceremony. But I often smell the Palo Santo wood when I'm in Catholic churches. especially throughout Europe.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Throughout Europe, you can smell it. So, but it's a beautiful scent. In China, they use it burning incense is used to honor ancestors.
Yeah, they use it. I mean, they use it in all their ceremonies, and they even used it for timekeeping. There were like incense clocks, which I thought was really interesting. I'd never heard of that before.
That's cool.
Go talk about the white sage. I feel like you know more about the sage.
So the white sage is it's a plant that's found on the plains. And so various Native American tribes use the white sage. And so they would make bundles of white sage and sweetgrass or whatever herbs and plants were from their indigenous area. But I know in Utah, my family has a ranch that was, settled in the 1900s. And there's a lot of sagebrush up there because it's kind of up in the Uinta Mountains. And when I was getting into this, I went out and I harvested a bunch of sage and dried it out. And you can burn that as well. So I
know you gave me some sticks. It's so pretty. I still have them.
I know. I was actually.
I'm like rationing them because they're so pretty.
Thank you. Yeah, I mixed them in, and you can make your own bundles if you're in an area where things, where you want to experiment with different herbs. But I used some of the wildflowers that I found, and then I mixed them in with the white sage, and then you dry them for a time. You have to dry them for quite a long time because I find that if there's any life in them at all, then they don't burn as well. So just like, you would with a campfire. The other thing that can be used to clear space is sound. So throughout time, we've seen the church bells. There are gongs, singing bowls, chimes. Anything that has that type of a vibration can come in and just clear space. And I think that was part of the ritual of ringing the bells, not only to call the local villagers into mass. In Europe, all the it seems like there's a cathedral at the center of every town, but it was also to cleanse and purify the air and make the space holy.
Right. Yeah, I like to ring a little singing bowl at the beginning of any yoga or meditation session I do, just to signal to myself that I'm going into this different space that's going to be special, and here's my intention for it today, type of thing. And you do the beautiful full sound healing sessions with your crystal bowls.
I do.
And those are so nice.
I do. I love them. And I've been my process has been evolving over time. I've been doing it now for a little over a year, but I use all different types of tuning forks and sound bowls and chimes and bells and drums. Even you can use drums as well.
Do you have the planetary chimes? Have you heard of those?
I don't think so.
It's I think that's what they're called, but they're supposedly tuned to the frequency of each planet.
Oh, I don't have those.
And I only know about it because I went to a sound healing in Olympia, and she came around with this chime, and it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience. I think it's always fun to see the people that come into sound healings because some people have experience with using sound as a purifier and others are just what is this? And they're reluctant and everybody has a different experience. So it's really fun for me to sit back and just kind of observe what people are bringing to the session themselves, either the experience, whether it be really, I think most people leave relaxed and rejuvenated and other people have really profound experiences. So it just depends on where you're at and if that's what's resonating for you. And that's one of the reasons why we always like to talk about these types of concepts is it just comes down to where are you at on your path and what is resonating with you in this moment. Maybe sound is what feels like it. You can walk around your house and ring the bell and that can blast out the energy, or you can burn the sage. If you have allergies and you don't want to burn sage, I have to wait until my husband goes out of town because he really complains about his allergies when I'm walking through the house with burning smoke and he's just what are you doing? But I can do sound and then, it goes away.
All right. And it's what makes sense and what excites you? There's no reason to take some random practice by some random group that lived thousands of years ago from another country and be like, okay, this is the thing that I have to do now, or else my space isn't going to be clean. Like that's
well, and
the dogmatic way.
Right. And that's where I would say, if anything, we're anti-dogma. So I like the idea of honoring and recognizing where it comes from, because I think there is something that about that in terms of, we talked about, we were going to maybe discuss cultural appropriation. And I've thought about that before when I'm burning this sacred Palo Santo wood. And I think, is it really okay that I'm doing this? And when I've talked to Danielle, who we're going to have on the podcast soon, who's my shamanic teacher, she says, these people are willingly giving of their wisdom. It's not like it's been taken from them. This is something that they're willingly sharing with people so that it will help humanity. And I wonder if that's really the difference, is if we can, I think there's something about needing to recognize where it came from and honoring that, but also saying, what, it doesn't have to be this one way. And ritual can be so many different things. And there is power in doing it. There's something about, like last night I went to this Zen Buddhist lecture, and there was a comment that was made saying it's really neat to think that I'm saying this mantra that, what was the guy's name? Dojin or something, that he said in the 1300s, and that it's still going on today. And that as I say this mantra, it connects me to this lineage of people who are trying to live their lives in this way. And there's something so beautiful and powerful about that. And so I get it on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's also this culture that we're living in called, for you and I, kind of American culture, or actually for you, Mexican culture now, right? Because you're living in Mexico.
Right.
But where we're taking our experiences and infusing them with whatever, whatever we're experiencing. So understanding that.
And there's amazing things to be learned, like through all the customs and the culture of other people. Like that's the beautiful thing about, like, especially in the information age, we have the internet, and you don't have to travel to the middle of the jungle to learn about these things.
Right.
Depending on wherever they came from.
And that really is what's so neat, I think, about this spiritual movement that I see happening among different people. I get that it can be, on the one hand, it can seem self-centered, hollow, and cliche. I can see that. I want to just state that and acknowledge that there is some of that out there that I can see why people would maybe roll their eyes at it. And yet there is such beauty and wisdom, and there's something so amazing about, a 21-year-old girl who's going through a breakup, or a 35-year-old mom who's trying to make sense of her life with her kids, or a 55-year-old woman whose kids just left wherever transition you're at, or man for that matter too. And for them to say, you know what, I'm going to take this sacred practice and I'm going to make it my own. And I just think that's a beautiful thing that's happening. So the good and the bad, right?
Right. Yeah. And that kind of leads us into, I found the story of the origin of sage. I think this story comes from the indigenous groups that lived in Texas. So this is from a Native American legend from the book When the Storm God Rises. So there was once a young and beautiful girl who went from her home in the desert to gather prickly pear fruit. And the sun was setting and the stars were coming out as she made her way back. And as she admired the changing sky, she noticed that one star was brighter and closer than all the others. And so she went home and dreamt of the star that night, and she saw in her dream that a handsome young sky dweller lived there on that star. And so she went out to the desert again the following evening and saw the star again, knowing that it was the sky dweller sparkling down at her. So for 7 days, she visited the desert, and for 7 nights, she dreamt of this young man. And each night they would confess their love for one another, but knew that she couldn't travel to the star and he couldn't travel to the desert. So she became more and more miserable at the thought of life so far from her love. And so she went to the old wise woman of her tribe to ask how she could die so that she'd be taken up to this star. And the lady says, life's too great a gift to be flung aside, and you need to live out the life that's been given you, but I can change you into a form that will allow you to live always out out under the desert sky. And so that night she went with this old woman into the desert to gather the powerful desert plants, which the woman crushed and made into a drink. And as soon as the girl drank the medicine, her feet began to take root in the dry, sandy soil. Her arms turned to branches, her black hair turned to leaves, and the maiden had become a new shrub that no one had ever seen before. When the sky dweller saw what had happened, he leaned so far out of his star lodge window that the edges of the star broke with his weight, and he fell with sparkling pieces of star straight towards the maiden who had become this bush. The starry bits were shattered to fine dust that powdered the leaves of the bush with white, and the youth was changed to purple blossom. So the lovers were finally together, and the bush with this white dusted leaves became known as sage.
Oh.
So there you go.
Always, and I think that's another interesting point is when I used to ask, like, well, why sage? Like, what's the property? Like, where's the, is there a study here that talks about how sage can be sacred? But I think it comes back to maybe it's tradition. Maybe there is something there's something about ancient wisdom that I think should be acknowledged. But then also the myth and the lore, right? I mean, part of what makes something sacred is that we say it's sacred.
Right. And when you take a story like this, you can think about this story and say, okay, I'm going to burn this sage and view it as a symbol of love, as a union of these opposites, the girl and this star guy. Like the whole yin yang principle, the Shiva Shakti, the earth sky, god and goddess. Like it can be like this, dramatized symbol of opposites.
Masculine, feminine, what's always been.
Yeah.
Right. Light and dark.
Right. And so, yeah, I think incorporating these new and old stories into your own creation of sacred space can kind of deepen the experience because it engages this playful imagination into forming relationships with all these personified characters. It has the power to potentially make the experience like alive to you in a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my husband, Danny, he actually was just writing a paper the other day about how story is not really separate from the experience of reality. Reality kind of is formed because of stories and by stories, especially if you look at like the influence of media in our lives today. It's just so pervasive.
Gosh. Right.
So why not like try to use these stories purposefully, like with your eyes open to the fact that it is not a fact, or it is or it isn't, but it's a way to like highlight and describe these true and helpful concepts.
I love that.
And
and
so
that's a nice
kind of
teaser that aren't you going to be talking to Danny on the podcast coming up?
I am, yes. In a couple of weeks, I think we're going to be focusing on identity, shifting identities throughout life. So
that'll be great. So before we wrap it up here, I just want to go through just a quick list so that our listeners can take away with them some tips and tools.
Yes.
So the awareness, so be aware of your physical environment and its effects on you. Notice how clutter makes you feel. Notice how colors in your house make you feel. If you're going through a transformational time or a transitional time, you may find yourself wearing different clothes, wanting to surround yourself with different colors, trying on new ways of being. And it's great to just notice and I think lean into that. See where you're naturally wanting to move, right?
Right. And especially with like the creating of physical spaces, there's a lot of really great systems, like especially coming out of the Eastern world, like Feng Shui, and I forgot what the yoga one is called, but about like organizing your actual space in your house and your office according to these certain properties and elements and stuff. So that can be like a part, if that interests you. There's a lot of great books out there. Part of just like the first step, I would say, is to like notice your environment, before you notice what it needs. Like, what do you want to focus on in this place? What is your intention for your space? We keep coming back to the whole intention thing. That's the real power behind the ritual, I think.
Living with purpose.
Right.
I was thinking about that yesterday, I was very frazzled. My kids were we were like running from like karate and then soccer and school and the doctor. And it was just like by 6 o'clock, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to like lose it. And I was meeting up with some friends last night and I got a babysitter and I remember like arriving and feeling like, oh my gosh, I just need to take a moment and drop into my body. And we had this discussion about the importance, like later on in the night, of like being aware of what energy you bring to whatever space you are. And I think this is the idea, you know, bringing it back to the idea of being intentional with like, who are you being in the moment? And this is something that I find I'm often unplugged. This is why I'm so focused on mindfulness, because I need it maybe more than anybody does.
We all do. Yeah.
But yes. Yeah, right. I mean, we do. But surrounding yourself with sights, sounds, smells, rituals that remind you of this.
Yeah. Do you want to give, like, if you kind of already said what you do for smudging a space, do you have any other, like, a step-by-step as far as, like, cleansing an area?
The two things that we didn't really mention were using crystals and essential oils. And so I think the if I'm talking about my rituals that I do, I always burn sage or Palo Santo to cleanse a space in my home. If I'm in a rush, I'll just like ring a bell. If I'm doing my meditation, like you said, a gong. I think I use crystals to remind me. I'll either use them I'll use them as I meditate. I'll also set them out when I'm trying to work on a certain thing. Like I'll pick a crystal and be like, you're going to remind me of self-love. So every time I see you, little rose quartz that's sitting by my bathtub, I'm going to remind myself to stop and acknowledge myself for whatever it is that I'm doing. Right. So I use it that way. I think I saw something the other day where someone was saying, you know, burn the sage smoke. No, there are rituals that are more complex that you can use, and that I think have a lot of value because it's so intentional. Like the reason why I think there's something good about doing complicated rituals is that it takes a lot of focus and you're putting a lot into it, right? Like if you wanted to grid your house with crystals and set up, you know, put each whatever, if you're using black tourmaline, which is a protective grounding stone, in the four corners of your room, and you were to burn some sage or light a candle, and then, you know, you can kind of decide how you want to build them. What I will do is on stories this week, when we do this, I will post a few examples of what each item that we're discussing looks like. And I even mentioned earlier essential oils, because you can even just carry some oils with you and say, this oil I'm going to use for de-stressing or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks. I think that is a wrap, and we are looking forward to our next episode. The interview coming up is going to be with Danielle, right?
That's right. We're interviewing Danielle this week or this next week, and we're going to be talking about the energetic body and how to heal yourself with energy. She is a shaman that has been practicing for 14 years and has been my teacher and is really, really amazing. So we're excited to have her on the show.
Awesome.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.